Hello Year 9 students, this is Mr. Shaban and today we're going to complete our unit of inheritance and variation. In today's lesson we're going to discuss two important topics. The first one is called selective breeding, the second one is called natural selection. So without wasting any time, let's start the lesson. Hello Year 9. In today's topic we're going to discuss two important lessons, selective breeding and natural selection. Our learning objective of today's lesson is to discuss the differences between the selective breeding and natural selection, and the key words are selective breeding and natural selection. Okay, at the beginning let's define the selective breeding. Selective breeding is the traditional method for improving crops and livestock, such as increasing the disease resistance or the yield production. So basically we're going to look into a favorable feature, and based on this favorable feature we're going to increase it among the offspring. Natural selection and selective breeding can both cause changes in animal and plants. The difference between two is the natural selection happens naturally without the intervention of the humans, while the selective breeding takes place by the help of the humans. So for this reason, selective breeding is sometimes can be called as artificial selection, because it's not made by the nature, it's made by the humans. So the aim of selective breeding is to look for a favorable feature. But as an example, we have too many favorable features. Today we're going to discuss three of them. It can be the cows. We can improve or enhance or support the cow that produce more milk than the others. So we need to increase the yield of milk production. The second feature that might be there, we might increase the percentage of the chicken that produce large eggs, or we might look for the wheat plants that produce lots of grains. So mainly our aim is to increase the yield of production, either for milk, eggs, or even the plants. That's to be able to cope up with the higher population that we have developed recently in the last few years. So the scientists had to look for a way to increase the milk production, or the size of egg, or the plant grain sizes. All of these have taken place through the selective breeding. Here I'm not talking about natural selection, I'm not talking about something which was made by the help of the nature, but I'm talking about something that was supported by the humans. Okay, so selective breeding takes place over many generations. These are the main steps involved in the selective breeding. The first step in order to have a selective breeding, or to increase the percentage of the cows that can produce more milk, is to decide which characteristics are important enough to select. We need to have an aim. Is our aim to get more milk, to get more beef, or to get larger eggs, or to get larger grain sizes? We need to be so specific when it comes to the characteristic which we are needed. The second point is to choose the parent that show these characteristics. We are going to look for the parents, like male and female cows. The female cow that has produced lots of milks, and a male cow that has like a mom or a female in the family that produce more milk. We get these two parents, and then we're going to choose the best offspring from these parents to produce the next generation. We'll make these parents to breed together. When they breed together, they are going to have too many offsprings. We're going to pick those who are producing more milk, and then we're going to choose them to breed again to get offspring, and so on. So the process is to choose the best parent and the best offspring that meet our need, that produce more milk, or that have lots of meat, or that have a large egg size when it comes to the chicken, or the one that has larger grain size when it comes to the plant. Good. In this picture, as you can see, we have different dogs. These dogs were developed by the help of selective breeding, People were breeding different dogs in order to get a certain feature, a favorable feature. As you can see, these dogs were not looking the same as their ancestors, but they look totally different than their ancestors. Right now I'm going to display a small video for you where it's going to discuss how the selective breeding takes place with the help of certain diagrams. So I want you to watch carefully to learn how selective breeding takes place, because we're going to move from this point to the natural selection. So watch the video and we'll complete later.
Selective breeding is also known as artificial selection. It is a process by which humans breed plants and animals for particular genetic characteristics. We have been doing this for thousands of years, ever since we first bred food crops from wild plants and started domesticating animals about 10,000 years ago. This is when we made the transition from hunter-gatherers to farmers. We no longer needed to wander around to gather food supplies. Wheat, barley, lentils, peas, rice, and potatoes were all cultivated by early citizens. We also began to tame animals for milk, meat, and hides. Goats, sheep, and chickens are thought to have been the first animals to be domesticated, followed later by bigger animals like horses and oxen for plowing and transportation. Agriculture allowed fewer people to provide more food. Regular, predictable food production led to increased populations and density of people. People now had the time to travel, trade, and communicate. Settlements began growing. The first villages and then cities were built near fields of domesticated plants. Civilization was founded upon selective breeding. How does selective breeding work? Parents with the desired characteristics are selected from a mixed population and are bred together. From the offspring, those with the desired characteristics are then also bred together. This continues over many generations until all the offspring show the desired characteristic. Just think of all the breeds of dog that are around today. These were all selectively bred from a common wolf ancestor. The desired characteristics that we select for can be chosen for usefulness or appearance, such as insect and disease resistance in food crops by breeding from the naturally resistant individuals to increase yields. Animals which produce more meat or milk to increase yields. Domestic dogs with a gentle nature. Large or unusual flowers. We just keep breeding and selecting and breeding once more until we hit the desired jackpot. Look at what we've done to modern chickens in 50 years. It's over 4 times bigger due to selective breeding. By inbreeding parents that are genetically closely related, negative outcomes can arise. The offspring will all share very similar genes, which could make some diseases more dangerous as all individuals would have the same weaknesses. The reduced gene pool also means that they are more vulnerable, as they have less chance of being able to adapt to changes in the environment, such as climate change. There's also an increased risk of genetic disease caused by recessive genes. Being genetically very similar, if both parents carry the recessive gene for a genetic disease, like cystic fibrosis, then the offspring will all inherit this disease. The white tiger is a good example of severe mutations building up due to the inbreeding of individuals that are too closely related. We have been selectively breeding for thousands of years, getting closer to our desired goal with each generation of offspring. Nowadays, we have come up with a faster way to do it: genetic engineering. We can transplant the gene for a desired characteristic straight into an organism. We will look at genetic engineering in more detail in another video. So there you have selective breeding. We have been doing it since the origins of agriculture and aren't looking to stop anytime soon. We do, however, need to bear in mind the potentially negative outcomes, such as a loss of genetic variety, potentially making the species vulnerable to other diseases.
Okay, as we have seen how the selective breeding takes place by the help of the humans, I want you to remember the first lesson or the first video that we had together, where it was discussing the introduction for term 3. We said in the natural selection we're going to discuss the examples of giraffes, and we're going to know how the giraffes that had short neck extinct and the giraffes that had long neck survived based on their ability to get the food from large trees. So basically, in order to give you the idea of the natural selection, we need to look at the giraffe as an example. Natural selection is a process that takes place by the help of the nature. If the organism has a certain feature that is going to help the organism to survive in its habitat, is going to survive. While the other organisms that don't have these characteristics to survive in the habitat, they are going to extinct. So basically, through millions of years, whatever the animals and the plants that we have at the moment, these are the animals or the plants that survived due to the adaptation and the natural selection. We're going to discuss one of these examples, which is the giraffes. As we have discussed earlier, we had two different kinds of giraffes. We had the giraffes with the shorter neck and the giraffes with the longer neck. And by the time the giraffes with the shorter neck didn't get their food, the more they extinct, and the giraffe with the longer neck was favored and was adapted to survive in the habitat. The following video is going to give you the history of the giraffe and how both of them have interacted when it comes to the adaptation, and based on that you're going to get the concept of the natural selection clearly. So without wasting any time, watch it and try when you watch this natural selection video to compare it with the other selective breeding video, because we're going to have a quick summary at the end where we need to get both information side to side.
The theory of evolution was developed by Charles Darwin and published in his book On the Origin of Species. He explained that natural selection is the process behind evolution. Charles Darwin developed his theories after his adventures upon the HMS Beagle. In his travels, he observed that creatures found on the islands he visited were similar to ones found on the mainland, but appeared to be slightly different. It wasn't until he returned home that he came to the conclusion that species are specially modified to their environments, and that's why they differ. He developed 4 conditions explaining why this happens. Darwin's theory of natural selection by descent with modification is testable and observable fact. Experiments have been conducted in the wild and in labs. Let's dive deeper into Darwin's 4 conditions. Condition number 1. Individuals within a population differ. There are features that differ within populations of the same animal. In our case, the feature that varies between our giraffes is neck length. Some giraffes were born with long necks, some were born with short necks. Condition number 2. The differences are, at least in part, passed from parents to offspring. Darwin's descent with modification is the idea that offspring are fairly similar to their parents, with some genetic differences. Condition number 3. Some individuals are more successful at surviving and reproducing than others. In the case of our giraffes, the long neck individual did not acquire its neck by stretching to grab the leaves. Instead, individuals within the population were born with the neck length that was longer than others. Because the longer neck allowed them to reach the food that was otherwise unattainable, it gave them an advantage. Condition number 4. The successful individuals succeed because of variant traits they have inherited and will pass on to their offspring. Giraffes with the longer neck advantage are in better health and able to pass this feature to their offspring. Because this trait is more successful than shorter necks, more individuals in the population have it. Over time, this process can result in populations that specialize for particular environments and may eventually result in emergence of new species. In other words, natural selection is an important process, though not the only process, by which evolution takes place within a population of organisms. Let's review. Individuals within a population differ. The differences are, at least in part, passed from parents to offspring. Some individuals are more successful at surviving and reproducing than others.
Excuse me.
The successful individuals succeed because of variant traits they have inherited and will pass on to their offspring. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.
Okay, as you have ended both videos, right now we're going to make a small comparison between selective breeding and natural selection. See, for both of them, we have population of organisms that show variation, and the variation is basically based on the genes. Then for the selective breeding, the people, humans, are the ones who are deciding which organism is going to breed in order to pass this characteristic to the offspring. On the other hand, the natural selection, it's only the nature which decide which characteristic will be passed. That's through the adaptation. So individuals that have characteristics that provide the best adaptation to their habitat are more likely to survive. So in the selective breeding, as humans have decided, so only the individuals with characteristics that people wanted are going to breed, while on the other hand, for the natural selection, only individuals with the best adaptation survive. So selective breeding is mainly about the humans. They are deciding which characteristic will be passed through which parent and which offspring. In the natural selection, the nature is deciding which one should be passed, which feature should be move on and survive in the habitat. It's based on the adaptation and surviving in the habitat. At the end, what we're going to get at the end of both processes, that the individuals of the species are going to have a favored feature. This feature either decided by human in selective breeding or by the natural selection in case of the nature. So we have in both sides a characteristic. In one side humans are deciding, in the other side nature is deciding. I hope you have understood the differences between the natural selection and selective breeding. That's well needed when it comes to discussing the evolution for Charles Darwin. So please keep this lesson in mind, and we're going to continue later the story of the natural selection along with Charles Darwin. So until we meet next time, stay safe.